I'm Steve Orlins. I'm president of the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations. I want to thank our partners. First, Jason from Columbia CEPA Center for Global Energy Policy, and Professor Zhang from the China Energy Fund, who've helped us put this together tonight. Let me also thank Chevron, who provided some of the funding for tonight. You've just feasted on these hors d'oeuvres, which I hope you all appreciate. I also should add that since this program is free, I'm sure I speak for both the energy policy for all of us, the Center for Global Energy Policy and the National Committee, that you're welcome, given that this was free, to go on our website and make a contribution, ncuscr.org. And or either one. I'm an equal opportunity pitcher because you're getting great value for for what you're for tonight. These energy experts that you're seeing, will be hearing tonight, are here because over the last, both today and tomorrow, we have talked in a informal, off-the-record dialogue about China's energy situation, America's energy situation, and about how the United States and China should work together to both reduce pollution, reduce carbon emissions, and enhance the U.S.-China relationship. Let me just, in my final part of my welcome, this morning when I got up, I live right by the World Trade Center. And when I got up, there were tons of television cameras out front, and the streets were closed. And as I walked through those reminders, so I walked through right by the Trade Center to get on the subway to come here, I realized I kind of had a realization that what we're doing today, that is promoting better understanding between the United States and China, having you being better able to understand China, that what we're doing today is creating an environment for better peace and security in the world, and doing it today in many ways honors those that perished in the tragedy 13 years ago. But thank you all for being here, and let me turn it over to my partner in this adventure, Professor Zhang. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, American friends and Chinese friends, old and new, good evening, everyone. First, it's a great honor as well as a great pleasure for me to attend such a big public event here. On behalf of Mr. Ye Jianming, Chairman of the Board of Directors, and President Chen Qiutu, the President of CFC, China Energy Company Limited. Now it's the Fortune Global 500 among the firm. It's a very big private company. On behalf of them, I extend their warm regards and sincere wishes for the best success of this event and the dialogue. Today we see the name of this event is China Energy 2020. These three words, we deliberately choose these three words to discuss the future of China energy in 2020, especially at the very important moment of the third preliminary session of 18th CPC Central Committee. because that session means the new beginning of deep reforming and further opening. It will be a new term for our country's development. Shortly after this session, we have at least 3 important meetings on energy. During these national meetings on energy, President Xi Jinping gave us a new term, energy revolution. It means energy production revolution, energy consumption revolution, energy supply technology, as well as the machine and the mechanism, as well as the international cooperation, these 5 aspects. So you will see a sea change after this session and in the future. You know, as we all know, there is an American shale gas revolution. Although there is some debate about that revolution, but to me, on the other side of the Pacific, I could see some big changes in your country. That revolution creates many new jobs, right? That revolution let you enjoy a low price of gas. And in these 2 days, when I live here, I come here, I see New York became a great construction site. It has something to do with that revolution. So, interestingly, you will see this revolution will have profound impact on China's future as well as on US future, especially if we can cooperate well. It will give us a great, profound impact on these countries' future and as well as on world's energy security layout. I don't want to say more. I just let you hear the important figures, especially our distinguished guest, our delegation member, Mr. Zhang Guobao, the chairman, as well as the former energy chief bureau, and other distinguished scholars. Let's listen to them and make our public a great success. Thank you.
So I'm just going to say 90 seconds of welcome and introduction because we want to get to substance and content. I know many of you, but not all of you. My name is Jason Bordoff. I'm a professor at Columbia School of International and Public Affairs. I direct the Center on Global Energy Policy there, which I founded about 18 months ago after leaving the White House. I had been an energy advisor to President Obama. And so the Center on Global Energy Policy is really thrilled to co-host this with our partners at the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations and on the China Energy Fund Committee. I want to thank Steve and David Butz and Ka Wei for all the work they did to put this dialogue and this convening together. It's really an honor to be here. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, just 2 words about the center. It's a new energy policy research institute in the middle of New York City focused on the economics and geopolitics of how dramatically the energy landscape is changing, what policy issues arise and are implicated by that. And we really do 4 things. We have quickly, I think, become the leading venue for public discussions and debate about current energy policy issues, private roundtables with people from industry and government and NGOs to provide a safe space to talk about current energy issues. Training the leaders of tomorrow, the students, which is part of our mission, and then research, and the research we produce. And tonight you'll see a presentation of one of our new pieces of research, a working draft of a new paper by David Sandalow, who was the Undersecretary of Energy for President Obama, has spent years and years as an expert on China and managed the U.S.-China energy relationship, and he was the first fellow who joined the center and really have been thrilled to have him as a partner as we've built this out. So this gives you a little bit of a sense of the kind of things we do here in New York. For those of you who are located here, just by way of example, next week on Monday we'll have Adam Szyminski, the head of the Energy Information Administration, releasing the International Energy Outlook. Later that day on Monday we'll have an event with the UK Energy Minister Ed Davey to release a new research paper that I've written on the impact of US natural gas exports on European energy security and Russian foreign policy. 2 days after that, we'll have a public event to talk about the barriers to financing the kind of energy investments we need to foster a transition to new and different forms of energy, particularly in the Pacific Rim and in Asia, with Dr. R.K. Pachauri, Nobel laureate and chairman of the IPCC, and a host of panelists moderated by our newest fellow, Carlos Pascual, who created and led the Energy Bureau at the State Department. So that gives you a little bit of a sense of the kind of people we have at Columbia Center on Global Energy Policy, the kind of issues we're interested in, and the kind of work that we're doing. So it's really an honor to co-host this and to have this conversation today. Look forward to our discussion. And so I think now David Sandalow is going to present the new research. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jason. Thank you for your inspired leadership of the Center on Global Energy Policy. It was a lot of fun and a great privilege to work with Jason and government, and it's been both of those things to work together at this new Center on Global Energy Policy. Thank you to Steve and Professor Zhang for co-hosting this event for the dialogue today, which was tremendous. And I'm looking forward to the discussion tonight. My assignment tonight is to talk about China and energy. And as I thought about this, I realized that talking about China and energy with Minister Zhang Guobao in the room is kind of like talking about physics with Albert Einstein in the room. Or maybe being asked to talk about a flood with Moses in the room. So I'm not going to go into incredibly deep detail because the man who really knows what he's talking about is on stage after me. But what I thought I would do in the few minutes I have tonight is offer a few thoughts about some of the basic facts about China and energy, just to get us grounded for those of you who aren't experts in this, and then talk about a report that we're releasing tonight on a specific topic, which is shale gas in China. And I'll go into some detail about a new report, an 80-page report that we're releasing that you can pick up on the way out the door. So I kind of start by reflecting on my first trip to China, which was in the summer of 1981. I had the great privilege of being an exchange student in one of the first groups of exchange students to go to China after normalization of relations between our two countries. It was actually a Columbia University program at Huadongchi Fandashui in Shanghai. And this, a couple of years ago, I went looking for a picture of Shanghai from 1981. And I found this one. It's actually 1983. It's 2 years after I was there. But that's the Bund. That's the waterfront in 1983, just 2 years after I was there. That's the same place today. So that's 1981. And in my adult lifetime, that has changed to that. That requires a lot of energy. China has gone through remarkable transformation in the past several decades. People have called it history and fast forward. And the implications for the global energy system have been profound. Let me just talk about a few of them. First, China is today the world's largest energy consumer and producer, both. It has had quite a remarkable decade. I'm going to mainly talk about the future, but I thought this was such a dramatic graph that it was worth showing. The dark gray line is bars are U.S. energy consumption, and the red is Chinese energy consumption. And on the left, I don't know if everybody can see it, it's the year 2000, and the right is 2010. So in the decade between 2000 and 2010, China moved from about half of U.S. energy consumption to more than U.S. energy consumption. Remarkable growth during that period. China today uses approximately half of the world's coal, slightly less in 2012, but it's probably trended up to be slightly more today. And this is, I think, the last slide I'm going to show about the past. But this shows the same phenomenon for China during the decade I was just talking about. The top line there is global consumption, excluding China, of coal. And then you see China's coal consumption trending up. This chart actually ends at 2011. In the year since, it's now reached the point that China uses, another way of saying it is China uses as much coal as the rest of the world combined. China's the world's leading oil importer. That threshold was just passed about 6 months ago in the last quarter of last year. The red line here are China's net oil imports. The blue line are the U.S. net oil imports. U.S. net oil imports have been declining as our auto efficiency has been improving dramatically and our oil production has been increasing in combination, therefore driving our net imports down to levels we haven't seen. I was told today by top EIA official that they're projecting that U.S. imports of oil will be only 20% in calendar year 2015, which is dramatic in comparison where we were just a few years ago. Meanwhile, China's are trending slightly up, and they are the world's largest net oil importer. And there's a reason for that. China is the #1 country in new car sales, with more than 20 million cars sold last year, 20 million new cars sold last year. But here's what I think is in some ways the most astounding statistic on that front. China today has a vehicle fleet, or a vehicle park it's sometimes called, of about 137 million vehicles. That is ballpark, what, 1 in 9, about 1 vehicle for every 9 Chinese people, or between 8 and 10. The United States has 1 vehicle for every person. Okay, so China has 1 vehicle for every 8 people. The United States has 1 for every 1. The growth that's going to continue in the Chinese vehicle fleet is dramatic, with dramatic implications for oil markets globally. China is the #1 country in the world on solar installations. China has for many, many years been the leading manufacturer of solar panels, and we're selling those solar panels around the world. In the past year, they have also become the major consumer of solar panels, installing in 2013 more than 11 gigawatts of solar power, and that's only going up. It's projected to actually increase pretty dramatically in the next couple of years. And here's just a little more information about the distribution globally. It's interesting. China's 29% of global PV or photovoltaic installations. Japan behind that. U.S. is third in that list. So in the United States today, in all of our buildings around the country, we have about 300 billion square feet of floor space. China is going to add that much floor space in its buildings in the next 15 to 20 years. So China in the next 15 or 20 years is projected to build as much square footage in buildings as exists in United States buildings today. So I think, for example, if you are looking for an inflection point, something that could have a significant impact on, for example, greenhouse gas emissions, improving the efficiency of the Chinese building fleet is about as good an inflection point as you could find, or about as good a tool as you could find. Buildings use a lot of energy. The more efficient Chinese buildings are, the less energy will be consumed and the less greenhouse gases will be emitted. On the topic of energy efficiency, by the way, China is not very energy efficient. If you look at the typical measure that's used by energy experts, it's energy consumed per unit of GDP. And in 2010, China, as you see here at 10,000, it's BTU per unit of GDP, which was significantly more than India, US, EU, and Japan. That's partly the legacy of a socialist system as it moves towards more of a market economy. But what this means, another way of saying this, is there are tremendous energy efficiency opportunities in China. There are tremendous opportunities to save money profitably, to save energy profitably in China right now. And the Chinese government's been extremely focused on that with some very tough energy efficiency targets in the 5-year planning process. So looking forward some, I thought this was interesting. These are energy consumption projections from the U.S. Energy Information Administration. you see this is its energy consumption. They cross around 2010. Net energy consumption, or energy consumption in the United States is projected to stay flat for the next several decades. And you see the growth in China that's projected. China is building half of the world's new nuclear plants today. The future of the world nuclear industry is being shaped in China. There are American reactors, reactors from a number of different countries that are being built in China. There was a pause for a safety review after Fukushima that Minister Zhang and I, when we were both in government, spent time talking about. And right now there is full steam ahead with some very important nuclear power construction in China, which, by the way, means much less in the way of greenhouse gas emissions, since it's zero carbon electricity. And on the topic of carbon, China is the world's largest emitter of carbon dioxide, and that's a trend that's going to continue. There is no solution to the global warming problem that doesn't involve both China and the United States absolutely centrally as key players. I thought this is an interesting slide, and for those of you who are experts, I think this is an interesting topic that is worth some further look. There are huge variations within China in industrialization and energy use in different parts of the country. This is a map which shows the distribution of industrial CO2 intensities in different parts of the countries, with higher concentrations in Ordos and Xinjiang. But I think this is actually an area that's ripe for some academic research and looking at the different distributions within China and different energy use. So what I want to do with the rest of my time is talk about maybe one of the areas in which China is not a major player in the energy area, and that's natural gas. So China is actually a fairly small user of natural gas at this point. It is a small portion of China's energy mix, as you can see in this chart. The blue is coal, and if you can see it, the yellow is natural gas. It's only 4% of total energy consumption in China, and the world average is 24%. So China uses much less natural gas on average than the rest of the world does. The Chinese government has established goals to increase that, partly because of air pollution challenges, and has goals to increase natural gas consumption and production within China. One of the interesting opportunities that China has in increasing its natural gas production and consumption is shale gas. China's shale gas resources are vast. By some estimates, they're the biggest in the world. That's what the U.S. Energy Information Agency says. And here you see rank order according to U.S. EIA. China has the biggest shale gas resources in the world, followed by Argentina, Algeria, and then the U.S. as number 4. There's great interest in China, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. There are pretty aggressive goals in terms of producing that shale gas. I thought this was interesting. So we've been working on this report, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. So I've been following the media on shale gas. So The Economist had a story last week, and I don't know if you can read the headline, but the headline underneath shale game, it says, China drastically reduces its ambitions to be a big shale gas producer. I thought that was interesting because the day before I had read a story from Reuters that China energy giants turned upbeat on shale gas. So there's a lot of, and by the way, these aren't predictions. These are two major media outlets reporting what people in China are saying now about shale gas in exactly the opposite way. So there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of confusion, and partly for that reason, we thought it might be valuable to, at Columbia Center on Global Energy Policy, to do a major study on this. And with a team of people, have been doing that for the past couple of months, and we're releasing it tonight. So it's going to be up on the web tonight. You can get copies as you leave. We hope it'll be an important resource for this issue in the weeks and months ahead. We're releasing a working draft tonight, and we're going to get some more comment on it and release a final version in the months ahead. I have some co-authors. Is Qing here? Qing Yang? Where is Qing? There's Qing, so one of the co-authors who did tremendous work on this project. And was Jing Chao here? So Jing Chao is another one of the co-authors. He just got a job in Washington, and he's on the train here. He told me his train was delayed, but he'll be here. But Qing Yang and Jing Chao Wu have done tremendous work on this report. So thank you, Ching. Thank you, Jing Chao, as well as two authors who were resident in Beijing, Anders Hove and Hunda Lin. Let me say a little bit about what we did. First, for those of you who aren't broadly familiar with the U.S. shale gas revolution, let me just say a word about that. Here's a chart from U.S. EIA. It's on the right is shale gas production over the last 14 years. And we've had an amazing revolution in shale gas production in the United States, going from essentially nothing to almost half, not quite, but almost half of U.S. natural gas production in the past couple of years. It's had dramatically favorable impacts on our economy, creating lots of jobs. It's helped to drive U.S. Greenhouse gas emissions down to their lowest level in 20 years, interestingly, as natural gas has replaced coal. And interesting geostrategic implications, too. The United States is moving towards becoming a net exporter of natural gas. So we in our project looked at what led to the U.S. shale gas revolution. And I don't have time to go into a lot of detail about this. It's in our report. But here's the factors that we identified from talking to experts. A large and high-quality shale resource, a competitive market system. And by the way, this competitive market system, it's worth reminding ourselves, actually, in the United States, we didn't have a competitive market system for natural gas until about 30 years ago. We actually had price controls on natural gas until the 1980s in the United States. But we've had one since a competitive system since the 1980s. We have private property rights here, so if you want to sell your mineral rights, you can do it. We had significant federal government support for R&D. The role of the federal government in the shale gas revolution was central, in my judgment, having read the literature on this. Federal tax incentives were very important. Another key piece was publicly available data. It's interesting, as I talked to shale gas entrepreneurs in the past couple of months, every one of them, or most of them, I should say, identified the fact of publicly available geologic data as being extremely important to their ability to produce shale gas. They go and they look for the shale where they know it's going to be as a result of the public data. And then we have an extensive pipeline network and entrepreneurial culture. Our methodology was to take a look at what's happening in China and compare it to what's happening in the United States and draw some results based on that. Here are our findings, and I spent too long in the first part of the report. I'm going to have to rush through part of this, I think, but I apologize for that. But let me just quickly tell you what our findings are. In the next few years, Chinese shale gas production is not going to be substantial. I don't think anybody expects that it will be. China has drilled today about 200 shale gas wells compared to about 100,000 in the United States. So it's just starting in China. And in the years ahead, you can plausibly construct scenarios for either very high growth or low growth scenarios. I think either one is possible. There are a series of barriers. I apologize, there's a lot of text here, but there's a series of barriers that are important, including extremely high production costs, weak incentives for state-owned enterprises, lack of competition, restrictions on foreign businesses, and limited data availability. In China today, in contrast to the situation I was describing with publicly available data in the United States, most of the data is held by state-owned enterprises, and there's actually state secrets laws that restrict the availability of geologic data. We found that policies are key to the future of the shale gas development in China. The geology of shale in China is not very well known. Much of what is known is proprietary, but whatever the rock formations look like as they're drilled, the policy environment is going to be central to developing China shale. Let me quickly tell you, today China has production targets for shale gas, production subsidies. As I said, this is a priority of the central government. It's about a little short of $2 per 1,000 cubic feet. That production subsidy expires in 2015. There are waivers of price controls, which are important. And we looked intensively at provincial policies as well. And the role of provinces is very important. I don't have time to talk about it now, but if you're interested, our report has a fair amount of information about what's happening in the provinces on shale gas. We spent a fair amount of time looking at environmental impacts, which are absolutely critical here. And the simple fact is the environmental impacts of shale gas in China could range anywhere from very positive to very negative. Shale gas in China could displace coal-fired power generation, and it could displace coal to gas, which has an even worse carbon footprint than coal-fired power generation. Shale gas could replace that, and the energy experts here will know that burning methane, burning natural gas has about half the carbon footprint of carbon dioxide. But if that methane leaks into the atmosphere, it's going to have a worse global warming impact. And if there aren't appropriate controls for water pollution, that's going to be a problem. So the environmental impacts could range anywhere from positive to negative. Water supply constraints are potentially serious. In the short term, they are probably not an issue. Most of the early shale gas production in China is happening in Sichuan and in Chongqing, where there's plenty of water. But in the medium and long term, shale gas are going to expand into areas that have real limited water availability, and that's going to be a potential issue. And here's an important point, I guess, at least as a former government official, I was struck thinking about this. This is an area where the U.S. and Chinese governments share common goals. It's interesting. Both the U.S. and Chinese governments have seen it in their interest to develop shale gas in China. What I hear from Chinese government officials when I talk to them is that they would like to develop shale gas for environmental reasons and economic reasons and geostrategic reasons. The United States government has worked very closely with the Chinese government to promote shale gas development for some of the same reasons, thinking that it's going to be good for the environment, they're good export opportunities for U.S. companies, and the geostrategic aspects of this are good, reducing pressure on global natural gas markets. It's an area where we have common goals. So we have a series of recommendations. I'm not going to have a chance to get into them because I'm running out of time. But we offer, based upon our analysis of the U.S. situation, recommendations for consideration of Chinese policymakers, accelerating market-based reforms, natural gas price reforms, speeding pipeline reforms, encouraging competition for mineral rights and improving data availability, providing a clear roadmap for foreign companies. And we have in this report, for those of you who are in the oil and gas industry, we have a model production sharing contract, which Qing Yang played a central role in developing. So thank you, Qing. And we hope this will be a resource to the industry as they work in this area. One I particularly want to focus on, just as I close, is investing in innovation. Because if there's going to be shale gas development in China, it's going to require innovation of different kinds. At a minimum, it's going to require innovation in some of the equipment that's used for shale gas development. We talked to people who said it's going to require basic innovation in terms of hydraulic fracturing and the basic techniques around hydraulic fracturing. And we also heard a lot about lack of coordination among ministries, and we recommend improved coordination as well. The U.S.-China Clean Energy Research Center has been a flagship project on innovation between the two countries. We recommend a new program within the U.S.-China Clean Energy Research Center on shale gas as part of our report. So let me just close where I began. I'm thinking there's a generation of students today who are traveling to China for the first time and experience of American students. And I think many of them, it's interesting, as they go to Beijing for the first time. My experience, I flew from Los Angeles to Shanghai 33 years ago. I left Los Angeles, the air was unbelievably polluted. It was so polluted in Los Angeles that you couldn't see the mountains from a skyscraper. And I arrived in Shanghai, and the air was totally clean, of course. So last year I had an experience, actually, I did almost the reverse trip. I flew from Beijing on a day where the PM 2.5 was over 300. And I flew from there to Los Angeles. And as I was driving on Los Angeles towards downtown from the airport, the air was crystal clear. Absolutely beautiful. And you could see the mountains. And what that says to me is, it is the United States in the past 30 years, I actually think we've done a lot of things poorly in my country. One thing we've actually done pretty well is clean the air in our cities. We still have a fair amount to do on that, but we've been reasonably successful in cleaning the air in our cities. The air in New York is much cleaner than it was 30 years ago. And China can do the same thing. As China gets serious about cleaning the air in the cities, many people here in the United States would like to be a partner. We'd like to be a partner in a number of ventures. And we look forward to 30 years from now, somebody will stand up here and say, you wouldn't believe it. When I went to Beijing, the PM 2.5 was 300. You can't believe how dirty the air was. Now the air in Beijing is crystal clear. Thank you very much.
We're technically over time, and we're late on our schedule. So let me just we'll just take 3 or 4 minutes to maybe ask just 2 questions. And then we're deeply honored tonight to have Minister Zhang Guobao here, and we don't want to take any time away from him and want to make sure he has as much time as possible. Also, the Dean of Columbia School of International Public Affairs, I see over here, Merit Janow, so I want to welcome her and thank her for being here, who knows many of you because of her deep expertise in China as well. So thanks for joining us. So you laid out, I'm just curious, you said it, you kind of said it could be, I'm going to just put you on the spot. It could be a big deal, it could be a small deal. And you kind of laid out what it'll take to go in those different directions. There are many people here who have deep familiarity with the inside workings of the Chinese government, but do you have a sense for, are things headed on, if one wants to produce a lot of shale gas, on the right track now or not? How optimistic are you about which of those 2 tracks we're on?
So of the barriers that we identify in the report, Jason, there are a few that there's clear movement on within the Chinese government. I mean, for example, we point to price controls as a barrier, and they were a barrier here in the United States for natural gas development. When we lifted them, natural gas development grew. In China today, there is very significant move towards reform of natural gas pricing. There's also a move towards reform of pipeline regulation, which is a slightly more complicated topic. There are a few areas where we identified as important where I think there's less movement. And the one that stuck out to me was data availability. I think lots of the entrepreneurs we talked to here in the United States said the availability of data, basic data about the geology is hugely important to us. I'm not aware of moves within the Chinese system to make that data more available.
And you kind of gave a laundry list of policy measures you think are necessary. And if you were to, as you know, as a foreign policymaker, you got to pick and choose your battles. So if you were to prioritize a little bit, if you could do one thing tomorrow, if you were sort of in charge of Chinese energy policy for a day, what would be the most significant thing that you could do to change?
I want to be really careful and respectful about answering that question because I'm not. I'm not, and I'm an American, I respect the Chinese people and the Chinese governments choosing their own goals here.
But in terms of the barriers you laid out,
the Chinese government has decided that producing shale gas is an objective and a goal, and if that's going to happen, I hope the report provides a useful resource of the types of changes that might help contribute to that. And like I just said, changing. I think the data is a sensitive issue, but a review of that policy is.
I was just wondering if some of the barriers were kind of seen more significant than others.
Yeah. No, I think, yeah.
And then let me just ask one last question. You mentioned we cleaned up the air in the U.S. We did that without stopping. We've used less coal, but we still use a lot of coal.
Yeah.
We've used technology to make coal cleaner from an air quality perspective, not a climate change perspective. So I'm curious about, you often hear people say we're going to see a sharp decline in coal usage, a sharp increase in natural gas usage because of air pollution concerns. Do you think that is necessarily the case, or might it be the case that coal continues to power the economy and local pollution is dealt with, but not greenhouse gas emissions?
Well, I'm going to partly duck that question since Minister Zhang is the expert on that topic. But let me just say that coal is a huge percentage of Chinese energy mix today, and even as it trends downward, it will still remain a huge percentage of the Chinese energy mix. And I think Mr. Zhang can give a lot more detail on that question.
So that's a good transition. So we'll ask Steve to please introduce Minister Zhang Guobao, and thank you again, David, for that excellent presentation.
Thank you.
I don't want to use any time introducing Zhang Guobao, but I've known a lot of ministers over my 38-year career of dealing with China. I'm not sure. I was trying to think when I was with you this morning, have I ever known one who has served in his position as a minister, in fact, in the most powerful ministry, the Reform and Development Commission, who was a vice minister for 13 years. It's truly extraordinary. And if this morning was any indication, I know exactly why they kept you in that position for so long, because you're really remarkably frank, remarkably straightforward, and remarkably well-informed. So please join me in welcoming Minister Zhang Guobao.
Good evening, dear guests. It's my pleasure to be invited to make a speech in this forum. I prepared a paper about China and the United energy issues. But I didn't write in English. I can speak some English, no problem. But I think Chinese is better than English. So let me still speak in Chinese and let the interpreter help me. It's okay. Tonight, I want to talk 3 topics. The one is China energy situation and China United energy situation compare these 2 countries' situation. Next, let me speak in Chinese. It's okay. I can speak, but I think I want to speak in Chinese. Is better than me. 中国自实行改革开放政策35年来，经济持续高速增长，能源生产和需求也持续快速增长。
In the 35 years since China has begun on the pathway toward economic reform and openness, our economy has developed incredibly quickly and continuously, and our energy usage has met the same pace.
1993年，中国变成石油的净进口国。
It was in 93, as you said, that China became a net energy importer.
2009年，又从煤炭的出口大国变成了煤炭净进口国家。
I'm sorry, that was oil importer in 93, and in 2009, China changed from being a net coal exporter to being a net coal importer as well.
特别是从2002年克服了亚洲金融危机以后，连续10年能源生产和需求高速增长。
Particularly since 2002, after we had recovered from the Asian flu, that round of economic hardship, then our economy developed particularly rapidly, and our energy needs developed as well.
2013年能源消费达到37.6亿吨标准煤。
So in 2013, our total energy consumption reached 36 trillion.
3.76 billion standard coal.
Thank you.
They equal 2.63 billion ton crude oil, standard oil. 这个数字超过了美国，使得中国成为世界上最大的能源生产国和消费国。
So this, of course, surpassed the U.S. figure, making China the world's largest importer and user of energy.
No. Become the largest production and consumer countries.
Okay, thank you.
中国能源消费占全世界能源消费的22.4%。
China is now 22.4% of all energy consumption in the world.
美国占世界能源消费的22%。
The U.S. represents just 22% even of total world energy consumption.
所以中美两国是世界上最大的能源生产国和消费国。
So obviously, both the U.S. and China are among the largest producers and consumers of energy in the world.
但是由于中国人口是美国的4倍多，所以人均年能源消费为2.7吨标准煤。就一个中国人一年消费2.7吨标准煤的能量。
So however, of course, China's population is more than 4 times that of the United States. So on a per capita basis, China's consumption of energy is still just 2.7 tons per year of standard coal in total energy use per capita.
这个数字刚刚略微超过世界人均年能源消费2.6吨标准煤的水平，就全世界。每个人一年是2.6吨，是中国刚刚在平均水平上。
So this is just a tiny bit above the total global average of 2.6 standard tons of coal per year per capita.
中国人均消费还不到美国人均年消费量的1/3。
In another way of putting that is that our per capita use of energy is still less than 1/3 that of U.S. per capita use.
中国的电力也快速增长。
Our use of electricity is also very rapidly increasing.
2013年，中国的电力总装机容量已经达到12.48亿千瓦。
12.4亿。
我来翻这个。Last year, the total storage capacity already reached 1.248 trillion watt， 也略微超过美国总装机12亿千瓦 ，a little over America the total storage 1.2 trillion watt。但人均用电水平，美国人一年用电13227千瓦时。
But in terms of per capita usage, the U.S. Annual usage per capita is about 13,227 kilowatt hours.
在全世界排名第7位。
That's the seventh highest in the world.
Arranged the 7 in the world. The number 1 is Ireland.
Okay.
Iceland.
Oh, Iceland.
冰岛。
Iceland.
Iceland. America is number 7. 而中国人均年用电是2912千瓦时，在世界上排名32位。
On a per capita basis, China's electric use is just 2,912 kilowatt hours per year, which makes China number 32 in per capita electric use in the world.
In the world, around 32. 美国人均用电是中国人的4.5倍。
In other words, the Americans on a per capita basis use 4.5 times the electricity that Chinese do.
而且那么人均的生活用电，美国就比中国就更高了。这个前面讲的是包括工业用电都在内。
Now, the previous figure includes both industrial and individual use, household use. If you look at household use only, the gap between American and Chinese use is even larger.
中国从1993年，就是那一年开始，中国变成净进口国，但是那一年只进口了原油6万吨。
I just mentioned that China became a net importer of oil in the year 1993. In that year, we imported just 60,000 tons of oil.
但是到了2013年，就是去年，中国净进口原油2.8亿吨。
But as of 2013, the year just passed, our net imports of oil were in fact 280 million tons of crude.
Yes. 原油的对外依存度达到了58%。
And imported crude is now 58% of all of our total petroleum use.
The imported crude oil, the take 58% now.
Yeah, that it's 58% of our crude oil used
we
in
need
China.
to import 58% crude oil from international market.
Yes.
天然气，2013年进口了530亿立方米。
And in terms of imports of natural gas, in 2013, we imported
53
billion cubic feet. Yeah.
Last year. 其中进口 LNG 就液化天然气是1700万吨。
And among that, LNG represented
17 million ton. 17 million ton LNG import. 天然气的对外依存度达到了31.6%。
31.6%. And the natural gas, the percentage of all natural gas use in China that was based on imported gas was 31.6%.
天然气在中国的能源结构当中只占58%。
天然气在所有的 so natural gas.
Natural gas only take 4.8% in the total energy mix. 这个美国呢是天然气在能源结构当中占24%。
Whereas in the U.S. that figure is 24%.
但是中国已经成为世界上第3大的天然气消费国。
But China is already the third largest consumer of natural gas in the world.
2013年，中国进口了2.7亿吨的煤炭。
In 2013, China imported 270 million tons of coal.
其中还从美国进口了500万吨。
5 million tons of this was imported from the United States.
我这个当了13年部长的，我都不敢相信。我说，那么一个煤这样的地制品，怎么从跨过太平洋进口到中国来？
In the 13 years that I worked in the ministry, I couldn't have imagined that such a heavy product would be sent across the Pacific to us here in China.
但是中国的一次能源的自给率啊，听起来刚才包括大约三德罗先生介绍，包括我介绍，大家看到的是一片紧张的局面。实际上，中国一次能源的自给率仍然高达90%，只有10%是进口的。
However, we should also recognize that when we're looking at the total energy usage in China, even though it's as David just talked about, it's an issue that a lot of us are very concerned about, the truth is we are more independent than it may appear. If you look at our total energy usage across all forms, only 10% of it is dependent on imports. 90% of it we supply our own energy needs.
那么中国的进口能源主要是油和气。
So for the most part, we import two products, crude petroleum and natural gas.
中国的能源结构和美国有很大的不同。
There are big structural differences between the U.S. and Chinese energy systems.
中国的煤炭占一次能源消费的67.5%，可能大卫先生也讲。
As David just mentioned, in primary energy use in China, coal is the largest factor, 67.5%.
中国的这一点上和印度的能源结构差不多，印度大概煤炭也占这么大的比例。
In that sense, we're much closer to India's situation than to the United States.
而美国的煤炭在能源结构当中只占不到30%。
And that, by contrast, in the United States, my understanding is coal supplies less than 30% of total energy use.
美国的核电占总发电量的20%。
In the U.S., nuclear power industries nuclear power plants are about 20% of total electricity production.
Yeah. 有100个核电反应堆。
With more than 100 nuclear power reactors.
Operating. Before have 104, but close to 4. Now have 100 nuclear station still operating. 而中国核电只占发电量的2%。
At present, nuclear power production in China is only 2% of our total electricity production.
现在中国只有28个核反应堆在运转。
Only 28 nuclear reactors are in operation in China today.
但是刚才戴维·桑德罗先生说，中国在建的核电站占世界的将近1半，这是真的。因为中国现在在建的核电站有30个，全世界只有64个核电站在建，但是中国占了其中30个。
But what David Sandalow just said is also true. That of new production of nuclear reactors, we are half of the world's production. As to my knowledge, there are 64 nuclear reactors currently being built throughout the world, 30 of them in China.
所以，美国的能源结构和中国相比较，清洁化的程度远远比中国好。
So it must be admitted that at present, the cleanliness of energy production in the United States is much greater than that of China.
今年，中国的可再生能源发展迅速，风能和太阳能发电异军突起。
But that we are working in that direction. Sustainable energy production is a major goal, both in terms of wind and in solar power production. We're making great strides.
2003年，我当中国的能源部部长的时候，那一年中国的风力发电只有48万千瓦，480个 megawatt， 480 megawatt。
So in 2003, the year that I became minister, there were only 480 megawatts of wind power being produced in China.
但是到了去年2013年，中国的风力发电已经超过了8000万千瓦，就80个 gigawatt。
And that by 2013, that number had expanded to 80 gigawatts.
和美国的风力装机容量大体上差不多。
Which made us roughly equal with total production of wind power in the United States.
中国是世界上最大的太阳能电池板的生产国， 刚才桑德罗先生也讲到。
As David Sandalow said, we are the largest producer of photovoltaics in the world now.
出口占世界太阳能板贸易量的50%。
Our exports provide about 50% of world needs for photovoltaic boards at the present time.
但是中国生产太阳能电池的原材料多晶硅，需要进口，而且主要是从美国的道康宁和德国的瓦克公司进口。
But however, we need to import many of the key components and materials for all the photovoltaics produced in China, including the coated silicon wafers, and these are mostly from a German company called
Wack and
American
道康宁。
Kani.
但是由于欧盟和美国对中国太阳能电池进行双方调查，提高关税，引发了贸易争端。
But there have been investigations in the European Union about supposed charges of dumping, and there have been trade disputes that have arisen about this topic.
中国呢也对进口的多晶硅提高了关税。
China, in response, has put increased tariffs for this coated silicon. So
yes,
yeah.
silicon. 这种贸易摩擦虽然有冠冕堂皇的理由，但是本质上，我认为还是贸易保护主义在作怪。
Now, various governments involved can have many discussions on this topic, but at bottom, I think that this is a form of trade protectionism, as this sort of discussion always is.
但是我认为其结果只是保护了少数公司的利益，而损害了世界上清洁能源的事业。
But the long-term effect is that there's been a short-term protection of the interests of a few companies at the expense of the ability of the world to continue increasing the production of clean energy.
事实上，也并没有能够阻止中国太阳能电池的出口。今年上半年，中国太阳能电池出口还是增加了18%。
And in fact, these measures have done nothing to slow the exports of Chinese-made photovoltaics. In fact, in the first half of this year, we've seen export production increase by a further 18%.
中国现在在水电、核电、风力发电、太阳能发电这4种清洁能源发电量已经占了全部发电量的30%，但是这主要是水电做出的贡献。
So in terms of the 4 key sources of renewable energy, hydro, nuclear, solar, and wind power, if you add them all up, it's close to 30% of China's electric production today, though we must admit that hydro is very much the largest percentage of that.
中国和美国在能源生产和消费总量上，刚才讲了，大体上差不多，但是结构有很大的不同，在能源价格上也有很大的不同。
Now, we've talked about that in terms of consumption and production. The U.S. and China are largely on a par in terms of energy, but our structures are very different, including our structures of energy pricing.
美国由于页岩气大量的生产，天然气价格现在大概只有每个 MMBTU 只有5到6个美金，而中国的价格高达1个 MMBTU 16到18美元。
Because of shale gas production, the price per MMBTU of gas in the United States has dropped to $5 or $6, whereas in China it would be $16 to $18 equivalent.
所以中国天然气价格是美国价格的3倍。
In other words, the price in China for natural gas is roughly 3 times what it is in the U.S.
另外，美国的工业电价是最便宜的，其次是商业用电，居民用电是最贵的。
It's also true that prices are kept particularly low for industrial use in the United States, whereas residential use pricing is kept somewhat higher.
美国的工业电价而中国呢刚好倒过来，工业用电是最贵的，大概1个千瓦时要13美分。
It's the opposite in China. Industrial pricing is kept higher. For every kilowatt hour is about 13 U.S. cents.
其次是商业用电，居民用电是最便宜的，大约1个千瓦时7.25美分。
The commercial use is in the middle, and then residential use is deliberately kept the lowest. It's now at about 7.25 cents U.S. cents per kilowatt hour.
电力消费结构也很不同。中国工业用电占70%，商业用电占13%，居民生活用电占12%，农业用电占5%。
And this is, but the structure of energy use of electricity use is also very different from that in the United States. In China, about 70% of electricity use goes to industrial production, 13% to commercial use, 12% to residential use, and the remainder about 5% to agricultural use.
而美国的商业和居民生活用电比例高达60%到70%，工业用电不到30%。
In the U.S., I understand that commercial and residential use combined is somewhere between 60 and 70% of total electricity use in the U.S., whereas industrial production use is under 30%.
刚才他已经提醒我了，我还只剩下1分钟，所以我第二个题目不讲了。
Because of time, I won't speak on my second topic.
我讲最后一个题目，但这个题目很重要，可能我要超过1分钟。
My last topic is very important, so I may go over that 1 minute. And then,
中美能源合作，我认为是基调，虽然有杂音，但没有根本的利害冲突。
I feel that U.S.-China cooperation on energy is extremely crucial, even though there may be some noise, but I don't feel that there are any fundamental conflicts between the policies of our two countries.
中美两国是世界上最大的能源生产国和消费国，在世界能源事务当中举足轻重。
We are jointly the world's greatest producers and users of electricity, and we believe, and we need to work together in order to improve the situation.
We play the very important role in the world energy issues. 由于受长期冷战思维的影响，中国和美国国内都有一些人把对方作为竞争对手，甚至是假想的敌国。
For political reasons, there are people within China and people within the United States who like to make the other country into a scapegoat and talk about issues in a way that are very pointed.
在能源领域也渲染相互争夺和竞争。
In the energy environment field, it's important that there can be cooperation as well as competition.
这个好像你没有完全翻出我的意思了，我也不会讲。渲染怎么说？你们哪个会英文的帮助我一下？渲染就故意把它说的这个中美两国之间的。
Oh, I'm sorry. That there's propaganda. There's exaggeration and propaganda about the conflicts that do exist.
其实从历史和现状仔细分析，中美两国能源合作是基调，并没有相互去争夺能源资源。
The truth is that the history of our two countries in terms of energy usage and exploration has been relatively independent. It's not as if we have direct conflicts where we're trying to grab each other's resources.
也没有因为能源争夺引发争端，甚至于战争。
There has never been any direct conflict, let alone a battle or a war between the U.S. and China over energy.
中国在19世纪点燃的第一盏电灯，是为了迎接美国总统威尔逊访问上海，在上海外滩点燃的。
In fact, the first electric light that was ever lit in China was lit in the 19th century in honor of the visit of President Woodrow Wilson. Lights were lit along the Bund in Shanghai to welcome him.
在40年代，当时中国的国民党政府与美国签订了协议，派了98名工程技术人员到美国的西屋公司来培训和学习。
In the 1940s, there was a cooperative agreement signed between the U.S. government and the then Kuomintang KMT government in China. 98 engineers from China came to the U.S. to study in the Westinghouse, thank you, corporation and learn about energy technology.
这些人后来大多数都留在了中国大陆，没有去台湾，成为新中国发电设备制造企业的骨干。
In fact, most of those people, when they came back, stayed on in the mainland, did not go to Taiwan with the KMT, and became some of the backbones of developing the modern energy technology infrastructure of China.
在50年代和60年代，因为朝鲜战争、越南战争，中美两国交恶，两国中断了交往。
In the 1950s and 1960s, due to conflicts in Korea and in Vietnam, the U.S. and China ended up moving apart and terminating diplomatic relations.
到了70年代，两国恢复了外交关系，中国对外开放，首先就引进了美国西屋公司的30万或60万千瓦的发电设备机组。
In the 1970s, once relations were normalized again between the U.S. and China, one of the first imports that China brought in from the United States was again from Westinghouse, 300
megawatt and 600 megawatt the equipment technology from Westinghouse. 至今仍然是中国发电设备的主力机型。
And even up to the present, the equipment of this sort is one of the key supports in China.
Major equipment. 近年来，中国又引进了西屋公司 AP1000第3代的核电技术，是中国核电的重要机型。
In this year, we once again imported AP1000 nuclear power reactor equipment from Westinghouse, and again, that collaboration is part of the key energy cooperation between the two countries.
在中国改革开放初期，美国的哈默就投资建设了山西的平朔煤矿。
In the early part of the period of opening and reform between the United States and China, there was Hammo is...
Mr. Hammo invested in Shanxi province, 平朔.
Armand Hammer, thank
yes,
you.
Yes, yes.
Armand Hammer.
Coal mine.
And invested in the coal mine.
美国的 ExxonMobil、雪佛龙、康菲等石油公司都进入中国进行油气风险勘探。美国的安然、AES 都在中国进行电力投资。
U.S. companies from ExxonMobil, Chevron, Kangfei's California, ConocoPhillips invested heavily in the development of energy in China. Enron was very involved in China, as well as AES and a number of other corporations.
中国企业在美国能源领域投资，虽然没有美国企业在中国那么多，但近年来也呈迅速增长的态势。
Chinese energy companies investing in the United States, although it has not been as large a trend historically, are also starting to increase rapidly recently.
例如，中海油、神华公司都投资几十亿美元在美国的页岩气开采产业。
For instance, CNOOC has invested several billions of U.S. dollars in shale gas in the United States.
中国的中投公司，中投就是 CIC 公司，入股15.8亿美元，成为美国 AES 电力公司的最大股东。我也是这个公司的董事。
And CIC, which I am one of the on the board of, has recently made a
1.58 billion US dollar, becomes the largest shareholder of AES Electricity Company. I'm the board member. 还有一批民营企业投资美国的风能、太阳能产业。
There are a number of Chinese non-state-owned enterprises which have invested in American photovoltaic and other solar and wind power companies.
而且中国和美国彼此都没有从对方国家进口大量的能源，除了我刚才讲的500万吨煤以外。我们也没有从美国进口油气，美国也没有从中国进口油气。
There's very little direct trade of energy between the U.S. and China, other than the 5 million tons of coal that we recently talked about.
Yeah, we never import oil and natural gas from the United States. Also, America didn't import any oil and natural gas from China. Never. 所以在国际能源市场当中，中美之间并没有因为争夺能源资源而发生争斗。
So the U.S. and China, in terms of energy trade, have never had any direct conflicts because of trade in energy.
In the international market, also we didn't compete together, such as in the Middle East. 伊拉克战争以后，中国在伊拉克的油田招标当中，也是和美国的企业进行合作。
After the Iraq War, Chinese companies developing China's oil fields in Iraq invited American companies to participate in its bids.
Together with American company together to bidding. 中国从中东进口的原油占进口量的50%。
Right now, crude oil being imported from the Middle East is about 50% of China's crude imports.
相反，美国从中东进口原油已经下降到进口量的28%。
Meantime, U.S. imports of crude oil have dropped to about 28%, being dependent on the Mideast.
中国也并没有因为美国的存在，从中东进口原油遇到什么困难，没有。
And China has never had any difficulties importing from the Mideast due to the existence of the United States. That's never happened.
在对伊朗核问题进行制裁的时候，尽管影响了中国和伊朗的油气合作，但中国顾全大局，十分克制，严格遵守联合国的协议，减少了从伊朗进口石油或中断了在伊朗的油气投资。
During the period of sanctions against Iran, even though the issues that led to UN sanctions against Iran had nothing directly to do to China, nevertheless, China insisted on abiding by all UN resolutions on this matter and strictly reduced our trade with Iran because of those sanctions.
所以，纵观世界其他地方，中美都没有因为能源事务引发争端，往往都是媒体和一部分人在渲染和炒作。
So really, there have been no direct conflicts between the U.S. and China specifically because of energy. Where there have been, I believe that it's the prejudice of the media or of a small number of persons who choose to focus on those issues.
这些人凭空想象的阴谋论。相反，中美两国在新能源领域开展了广泛的合作，成立了中美清洁能源中心，也签订了和平利用原子能协议。
These people are always seeking for some sort of a plot, but the truth is, we believe that there's much greater opportunity for open cooperation between the two sides, such as represented by the agreement that we've signed with the committee.
我观察，中美两国的政治领导人都保持了清醒的头脑，维护中美两大国的合作关系，这才是两国在能源领域合作的主流。
I believe that through cooperation such as the one we're at here today, we can continue to move forward in the mainstream of U.S.-Chinese energy collaboration.
这个我还没有讲完，但是他已经举了很多次了。我因为觉得这个问题太重要，所以我就 overtime， 我要把它讲完。
I know I'm over time. I believe this problem is too important. I wanted to stress it again.
因为你们给我这个机会也不容易啊，谢谢。
Thank you.
Minister, I want to thank you for those extremely thoughtful and informative remarks. I hope, in particular, the last portion of your remarks on U.S.-China relations, I hope that you'll publish that and send it around, because I think it's extremely interesting and informative. I'm delighted to welcome to the stage next a terrific panel, which is going to be moderated by Ken Lieberthal.
Thank you very much. I'm Ken Lieberthal, Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution in Washington. We have three panelists here. I'm not going to do long introductions because we have very little time and want to have an opportunity for interaction both on the panel and for people in the audience to raise questions. Sitting directly to my left is Dr. Chen Wei-dong, who is Chief Energy Researcher of the Energy Economics Institute of the Chinese National Offshore Oil Corporation. Then in the middle, Joanna Lewis, who is Assistant Professor of Science, Technology, and International Affairs at Georgetown University, has done a great deal of work on clean energy in China. And last but by no means least, Professor Xu Xiaojie, who is Director of the World Energy in the Institute of World Economics and Politics of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, a national ministerial level body. I guess my fundamental question, and I'd ask each of you to give your kind of brief take on this, is as we heard, the U.S. and China are the two largest energy producers, two largest energy consumers, two largest greenhouse gas emitters. You have the two largest automotive markets in the world. In many ways, what we can do, if we can move ahead on meeting our energy needs without dramatically increasing greenhouse gas emissions, we will serve a leadership role in the world on this. If we can't, frankly, most of the rest of the world is going to think that if we can't take up responsibility for this, then others certainly should not bear the burden. I guess my question is, China is now, unlike the U.S., is now increasing its greenhouse gas emissions. Still has a long way to go in raising the level of urbanization to what it seeks, and urbanization, in fact, will increase. Its rate of building new floor space is the highest in the world. Its rate of increase in new car sales, new vehicle sales is the highest in the world and will continue to grow rapidly by all accounts. So my question is, as you look ahead, how do you see China's greenhouse gas emissions moving? How long will they be moving up? When do you expect them to level off? And what is the key issue to your mind? This is obviously too complicated to ask for a key issue, but I'm going to do it anyway. What is the key issue that we should be focusing on as we look to see what China's record is likely to be on this? And why don't we start, if we can, with Professor Xu, who I know has done a great deal of work on this, and then go down the line. Professor Xu.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions. Good evening. Good question, actually. China as largest energy consumers and producers in the world. So we have seen, and this morning, actually, I made a presentation on the energy outlook based on our best understanding of Chinese policy, existing policies. We believe energy consumption will continue to increase from now today's level to a much higher level to in the year 2030 at the growth rate will be 2.06. So it means the energy demand will be keeping upward and leveled after the 2020. So that means the carbon emission will be increased accordingly as well. Because the energy structure, the energy consumption very much dominated by the fossil fuel, mainly coal. So we have to dealing with all the issues because the carbon increase dramatically. But also we have to think about how to dealing with the carbon emissions. As now China has become a bigger CO2 emitters. So we have to think about all the issues. First of all, we have to see the situation. The trend is going to like this way, but we also think about how to dealing with the issues inside. So first and the most important thing is how to dealing with the coal. Today, coal is really a little bit dirty because of the high emission, CO2 emissions and other type of emitters from the coal consumptions. But also, we have, at the same time, I think about the coal is our situation. Because coal is so dominated the energy consumption, according to the energy resources, coal almost take 94%. This is a reality. We have to
live with the coal. We cannot live without the coal in China from now on. So coal is the issue, is dirty today, but we have to think about to make the coal cleaner in the future. This is the fundamental things for us now.
Okay. Thank you very much. Joanna, let me focus the question a little bit. You can give the answer you want to give, but let me also ask you, is there any such thing as clean coal, especially clean coal that is competitive with other sources of energy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's an important question. And when you ask what the crucial thing is for China, I think many people would say coal is going to be central because it plays such a big share. And looking for ways that you can burn coal more cleanly will be key to that. I don't actually think we have clean coal today. I think we have a lot of technologies which are under development, both in China and the United States, which could, I mean, depending how you define clean coal, if your issue is CO2 emissions, you can start to capture it. So I think we're moving in that direction. But I actually think that coal is only part of the problem, and that the bigger challenge for China in the coming years is total demand and slowing demand growth. If the economy can become more efficient, we saw a chart earlier this evening from David Sandalow that there's a long way to go in terms of reducing energy intensity in China. And only when you can make energy consumption more efficient can renewables and other cleaner sources of energy start to play a bigger share in the total energy mix. We've seen extremely rapid growth in renewables in China, as was mentioned earlier. And I think that it's really worth noting that we're seeing a notable shift out of the 12th five-year plan period in the role that clean energy is playing in China. While it's still a small share in terms of total electricity generation, less than 5% coming from non-hydro renewables, as well as nuclear. If you look at what's being built in China in terms of new power plant capacity, in 2013, for the first time, China actually built more new non-fossil plants than they did fossil plants. And that's for the first time ever. We had seen record amounts of coal plants being built in China for the last decade, and we're actually seeing that start to slow. And electricity consumption slowing as well. So I think this is a really positive sign. And part of this has been achieved because of the policies that have put in place to increase the use of wind energy, the use of solar energy. I think it is worth noting that China installed more solar last year than any country's ever been able to achieve in a single year as a result of the policy incentives put in place there. So while the shares are small, I think the direction is important. And in terms of how this translates into carbon emissions, I think that already you're hearing when we start to think about coal demand slowing and potentially even leveling off in the coming 1 to 2 decades, carbon emissions trajectories in China start to look quite different than we were predicting just a few years ago. I hate to make predictions because we are frequently wrong about where carbon emissions may go for China, but I do think that the fact that we are now hearing a discussion of eventual leveling off and even a peaking of carbon emissions in China, these were words that were never really mentioned just a few years ago, and I don't mean just by researchers like myself, but by very senior researchers and officials within China. So I think this is a positive sign as the world looks to a new international climate deal, and I think the steps we've seen coming out of Washington in terms of carbon emissions regulations are another positive step.
Thank you.
Recently, I do some study on the China-U.S. oil industry cooperation history. Just like Zhang Guobao just mentioned, we have long cooperation history over 100 years. The first China-U.S. joint venture oil company set up in 1914, 100 years ago. That is strongly influences the China oil industry. In that period, the so-called China poor oil reserve country, the result is come out of this cooperation. But second time is very important. Just when China opened up, Carter invited the China oil delegation visit U.S. to set up the joint venture, CNOOC, for the joint venture company. So in that visit, we start the second cooperation. We adopt the modern oil industry concept technology and management. The third time is early 2000. The three oil company, major oil company, public New York. I'm trained by Exxon in 1985, 1986 for the second corporation as a geophysicist. The first time I visit New York, 2007, for the first China oil services company, IPO in New York. So this three-time corporation is to make a great shaping of the Chinese oil industry right now. But review the last 100 years cooperation, three things I think are very important for next step, our corporations. We have to cooperate, just like Zhang Guobao said, we have to do that. First of all, I think that politicians make the major role for the corporation. They are set up the foundation. The political policy of the two countries heavily influences the cooperation of the industry. If no foundation, no the long-term view of the politicians, will no oil cooperation. Second, the company, how the company cooperate each other, make the cooperation sustainable or not sustainable. Now, China oil industry structure is very different from U.S. In U.S., there are thousands, even 10,000 oil companies, but most are medium and small. It's very active. China have no this end. I think the first cooperation way, how we created that small, middle and small company, more active, more productive small oil company in China. That is not many, or almost none. Second, the major oil company like ExxonMobil, CNPC, Chevron, Sinopec, ConocoPhillips, and the CNOOC, they can cooperate in more broad way, in the international way. Very interesting, just like Zhang Guobao said, U.S. and China never had the depend on each other, oil and gas. But we are really heavily related with Russia about the real oil and gas supply. And also see the 100 years history, China, Russia, U.S., the triangle, always there, always there. So that's really out of think of how we can go operating for the next step. Being a scholar, we must convince the company. Enterprise also need to convince our politicians. That's what I want to say.
That raises a lot of food for thought, but Professor Xu?
Yes, I would like to add more comments on the environment issues, the energy and environment issues. When we're
very short.
When we're facing the environment issues, we also immediately think about how to reduce the consumption of the coal. That's right. This is the right direction we have to say, you know. And now the renewable consumption is a very low level in China. We have to think about the increase, the non-fossil fuel renewable consumption increase. But also we have to again think about how to make the coal cleaner. Actually, if we talk about the coal, actually, we cannot complain, you know, the coal as a main source of the CO2 emissions. Actually, now CO2 emissions from coal consumption is really from the direct burning of the coal. Actually, some CO2 emission from the coal power generation is very limited and controllable. This is my point. I believe in the future, near zero emission will be possible for the coal-fired generations.
Does that...
And that means make the coal much cleaner.
Does that also require coal capture, CO2 capture and sequestration?
Yeah.
Doesn't that increase the cost of coal?
Yes.
Yes.
Increase cost, increase the technology requirements and technology innovation. This is something we have to deal with seriously.
And do you think that China will? You think that China will, say, in the next 15 years, try to deploy CCS, coal capture and sequestration, carbon capture and sequestration, or CCUS, coal capture, utilization and sequestration on a large scale?
Yeah, I think now there is many technology routes we should to use. For example, IGCC and ultra supercritical power generation. This is a very mature technology now. We very much recognize the importance and useful for the coal-fired generations. But simply because of some the cost, issues we have to dealing with. So, but we have to make this possible through the economic reform and the policy incentives, make the sense dealing with this issue, plus CCUS.
Let me open this up to the audience for questions that you want to raise. This is fundamentally about where China's economic reforms are headed and how that impacts on China's environment, on carbon emissions, and potential areas for U.S.-China cooperation. Kind of within that broad sphere, I know we have a lot of expertise out in the audience. Anyone want to raise? Yes, over here, and please, there's a roving microphone, isn't there? Yes, if you wait just a moment. Here we go. If you please just indicate who you are and feel free to direct a question to one person or another on the
Roma Stibravi, president of NGO Sustainability. And my question is directed to the climate summit that the Secretary General of the United Nations will be having on September 23rd. And of course, if it is to have any meaning, China and the U.S. have to be ready to make some commitments. I'd like to know China, what the thinking in China is right now.
Does anyone want to respond to that? Or what kind of commitment is China thinking about making at the meeting at the UN on the 23rd?
Yeah, I think the summit is coming, as I know from media. Again, based on our research, I think China can contribute a great deal to reduce the CO2 emissions, especially based on our research. I think the energy intensity or carbon intensity can be increased in the much large percentages from my presentations. There's a big room to cooperate. During this summit, I think technology exchange, especially for clean coal, should be focused.
And maybe I could just add briefly. I mean, I think that it's quite notable that China is already experimenting with several pilot cap-and-trade programs for carbon dioxide emissions in several different provinces and municipalities, and the government has said that this is going to lay the foundation eventually for a national program. So I think what we're looking for from China, things to watch out for will be the timing of such announcements. I think we're likely to see some form of carbon target again in the 13th five-year plan, just as we did in the 12th five-year plan. But we don't know yet exactly what form that will take. Will it be an intensity-based target, an absolute target, and when such figures may be announced, leading up, any time, I think, between the UN meeting and the Paris negotiations in 2015 is certainly what the world would be looking towards.
Yes, Becky? Yes, ma'am. Oh, I'm sorry, if you wait for the microphone. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jane Marchant. I'm a Columbia University. Hello? At the Lenfest Center for Sustainable Energy. A big part of that as well is the carbon tax, and that's a big reality for solving climate change. How much of an actual detriment to the Chinese economy would installing a carbon tax be?
Well, there is some history here. China was, as I recall, focused quite a bit on developing a carbon tax approach until about 4 years ago, when the notion of a carbon tax took second place to the notion of developing cap and trade. And there are now 7 experimental cap and trade systems being tried out, and experience will be summed up. I suspect a national regime is hopefully going to be rolled out around 2016. Why go to a cap and trade system instead of carbon tax, given the potentially greater simplicity of a carbon tax as an approach. Cap and trade is a very, very complicated way to put a price on carbon. Thoughts?
Please, actually, I have no comment on these issues. Carbon tax and carbon trading are two options. For some officials may prefer to take carbon tax. I have no more research on the issue. Maybe they take this easy way, to start up.
Yeah, I mean, I think a price on carbon either way would certainly be important for incentivizing the types of technologies we're talking about. But I think another thing to look towards, which could be even more important in the short term, would be electricity pricing reform and reforms on fossil fuel pricing in China. I mean, coal is extremely cheap right now in China. We're discussing a lot today about pricing of resources, and I think if coal were more expensive, whether through a carbon tax or another sort of a reform, that could be very important for disincentivizing continued use.
Anyone else from the floor? Yes, Becky. There's a microphone coming back to you on the side.
A student at Columbia University. And I have a quick question. So anecdotally, I've heard that enforcing policies in China has not really been too effective in terms of like carbon scrubbers and things like that. So I was wondering if A, that's true, and B, how you could increase enforcement for those sorts of policies moving forward.
I'm sorry, how do you see enforcement of what?
Like carbon scrubbers and things like that for coal power plants.
In other words,
I can rephrase the question.
Please.
So I've heard anecdotally that people will turn off scrubbers or turn on scrubbers when inspectors come around and then turn them off, and there's sort of been an enforcement issue. And I don't know, A, if that's true, but is that true? And then B, how can that compliance be increased?
Price enforcement for the environment targets.
I can start, maybe others join in. Yeah. I mean, I think that one thing that's been really interesting are the new targets that have been put in place for the air pollution problems that we've seen in the last year or so are being very aggressively enforced. We've heard about leaders in China taking direct control for these targets being met, and officials' promotions being tied to their ability to meet these air pollution and coal reduction targets. So I think, of course, there are always challenges with enforcement in such a large country where there's many different incentives at the local level for economic development, depending on what industry is driving the local economy. But I do think we see enforcement moving in the right direction.
The coal realism and the environment idealism always conflict in almost every country. In China, especially like that. In coal now, for MMBTU, counted by MMBTU, only $3 the MMBTU for using coal. But in China, just like Zhang Guobao said, our gas, LNG, import LNG is around the $16 to $18 per MMBTU. So China now, the smoke is very serious. So everybody impacted by the wars and the worsen pollutions. We really want to reduce the pollutions, but being the major countries, reduce the coal percentages is quite difficult. Today's China, almost half coal was directly burned in the countryside or small town. That is make the most pollution and the emissions. It's not the modern coal electricity power station. That will relate directly to our infrastructure. So 1.3 billion people still have people in the countryside. How that can improve is not only the public can make a decision, can achieve. We still need many investment, long time to work to change it. Just like U.S., if no shale gas revolution, it cannot imagine now the American coal plant drop down 50%. If no shale gas revolution, cannot down to today's about 40. China also very focused on shale gas and also focused on import, both pipeline and the LNG. China-Russian deal is the biggest ever, the pipeline gas import, 400 billion for next 20 years. But the volume only account our plan 10% annual, 10%, even the Russian pipeline coming. So it's a big country, big population. All the things we really want to change overnight, but that cannot.
Professor Xu?
Yeah, I would like to add a comment back to your questions here about the environmental policy. Actually, we have serious environment policies in China, and the message from them is quite clear. I just mentioned two examples. One is thermal power atmosphere pollution standards. This restriction released in the year 2011, they have very strict requirements for the existing thermal power pollution close to the near zero emissions. And they also have close requirements for the to be built new coal-fired generations built after the year 2014. That will be close to the requirements as well. And another one is a plan for action against atmosphere pollution. We mentioned this early morning. This message is also very clear for the policymakers at the national level and the provincial level as well. Every region in the company have to strictly follow the restrictions and requirements.
I'm afraid that our time has come to a conclusion. We've had just an opportunity to get some taste of how complex these issues are. China is trying to restructure the composition of its GDP, accelerate urbanization, maintain high levels of employment, faces an enormous water shortage throughout North China and wants to shift its energy base all at the same time. This is an extraordinarily complicated, wide-ranging, and inevitably uncertain path forward. The goals are ambitious, as David Sandalow's and Minister Zhang Guobao's introductory speeches made very clear. How China fares in this will be of enormous consequence, not only to China, not only to global energy markets, but to the global environment and to the quality of life that all of us are able to have in the coming decades. So I want to thank our panelists for contributing their wisdom to these issues. I'm not sure, Steve, do you want to make some concluding remarks?
I'm just going to close the proceedings by saying all of our speakers have been what the Chinese would call 劳动模范, which is model workers, because they started very early this morning. We had meetings all day, and now they've spoken, and they're all going strong. So thank you. It's been fabulous. I would just, in closing, make one point, which is I think what we've heard from Zhang Guobao, what we've heard from David, what we've heard from virtually all the speakers, is that at a time of strategic turbulence in the U.S.-China relationship, energy cooperation can be the bright, shining model on the Hill for how the United States and China can work together, and I think that's clear. Let me thank our friends from the Center on Global Energy Policy and the China Energy Fund Committee and everyone for coming. But thank you all. Good evening.